Recording.
Now.
Fantastic. Got it. Great. Okay. So, we've been reading the Moreh Nevukhim. And Rambam Maimonides taught us in the first part that any term in the Torah, Tanakh, that refers to God has to be understood figuratively, not literally, and certainly not in a physical way. And in that fashion, a perplexed Jew in his time can be a devotee of the Torah and at the same time be an Aristotelian, which was what you wanted to be if you were a sophisticated thinker. Not right or wrong, but just very sophisticated. So you don't want to have a physical God. So all the words in the Torah that imply physicality can be interpreted, and the Rambam spends most of the first book or part of the Moreh Nevukhim going through term by term. We've looked at a few. So no more human qualities to God. And in fact, we can hardly speak about him at all, because anything positive we say is going to fall way short of what he really is. So we call that the via negativa. So I'm going to ask you, Mickey, if you can mute everybody. Oh, right.
Everybody
good.
should be mute now.
Everybody is muted. Excellent. So we learned about the way of silence, and we're very careful now, whatever we say or think about God, but we do try and get to know him, and we get to know him by knowing how he manifests himself in his world. Science, physics, astronomy, mathematics, trigonometry, geometry, biology, zoology, etc. And also his kindness, goodness, mercy, truth, or as close as we can get to those midot, those attributes. But the question that you might ask is, well, look, Greeks did have gods. We learn all about them. We know about Zeus, and I won't go through all of the Greek gods and goddesses, but there were lots of them. Was Aristotle a believer in the Greek gods or not? And why is he so troubled by human representations? The gods, after all, that we know from Greek mythology were very human. In fact, they were almost like naughty children with superpowers. They are jealous, they're angry, they pick fights. They are quite an irresponsible lot, okay? And you have to make them feel good. You have to bribe them, give them sacrifices. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. So what's bothering Aristotle? What's bothering Aristotle is that he lives in a society where people seem to have pathetic gods and great intellects. Now, why would you need a god? Take Zeus or Zeus, thunder, lightning, control of things that made people scared. If you don't know how thunder and lightning work, if you don't know how the world works or how nature works, you don't know the wisdom of the universe, then you need a god who you can only think of as somebody like you and have a way of making him feel nice about you. So Aristotle and the philosophical Greeks were really bothered by the religion in their time. It was primitive. It spoke of society that didn't know how things worked. So Aristotle really pushes God right out of the workings of the world. He's the unmoved mover. His existence is necessary, but the world always existed. It always will exist. And he is there in some way we don't understand to keep the whole enterprise going. So Aristotle really has, in a way, got rid of God. And he's replaced it with philosophy. Philosophy, of course, means natural philosophy, which is science, and metaphysics. Now, Aristotle does have to have a god. We have to understand that if he didn't have a god, he'd be in big trouble with the authorities in Greece. Remember Socrates, too much philosophy, not enough religion, you might be forced to commit suicide by taking hemlock. So philosophers are dangerous. They threaten the established religion. So as long as you have a God, you can refine your God almost out of existence, but still have a God. We have to wait till the 19th century before Nietzsche comes along and says, there is no God. But everybody, even the most critical and intelligent thinkers in the past, up until the 19th century, talked about God. Now, what they did with God, of course, is the interesting point. So just that by way of background to understand what Aristotle did. So Aristotle wants to teach us that what we need to invest in is wisdom. Our God is a God of absolute wisdom. And to get close to him, we have to understand how wise he is. And so we need to understand the world and be very knowledgeable in all things to do with the world. Astronomy, mathematics, geometry, logic, etc., etc. Will is what he doesn't want. Not that God is angry and therefore throws a few thunderbolts, or God is jealous and kills off a whole bunch of people, or God is keen on this one and not that one. Okay? So it's wisdom against will. This is the fundamental principle of Greek philosophy that we discovered last time. Now, Maimonides starts with an easy task in the first part. He says, we're going to get the physicality out of God. And we've seen how he does that. He can interpret the Torah. But the issue that's going to be really bothersome for us is Aristotle's idea that the world always existed. There was no act of creation. Now, to say there was no act of creation is somewhat daunting from a religious point of view. After all, if God doesn't intervene and create the world, then he doesn't intervene, there are no miracles, he doesn't look after the good and perhaps punish the bad, he doesn't send prophets to bring a message at a particular time when the world needs it. So what do we do with our religion if nothing changes, if it's just understanding the wisdom that makes the universe run? Now, this therefore follows on, and this takes us from the 71st chapter of the first book to the 31st chapter in the second book. 37 chapters in all deal with eternity of the universe, and now we are going to read probably the most important chapter in this topic. So everybody please focus on the text.
I ask one question.
Absolutely, Yoshua.
Why did Rambam agree that God has no corporeality? Why would that bother him if God had some kind? We say that the human being is B'Tselem Elokim. That means that he must have some and the
Yoshua, we talked about this in the first Shiur, the first section in the Moreh Nevukhim. Rambam proved that the word Selem in the Tanakh does not mean a physical form ever. And number two, because he feels it's important for his perplexed Jew who believes in Aristotle, just as you may believe as a scientist in evolution, okay? You may believe in an absolutely materialistic world, okay? And you might feel bad if you walk around and talk to your scientific friends and you say, actually, God, or actually, I do not believe in evolution. Trying to bring you an example. It's embarrassing. So let's leave it at that and move on. Da.
You think Rambam was embarrassed? That's why he took over?
He wants to help the embarrassed people, and he could very well have been embarrassed, and we'll see that. I'm going to say something next time when we talk about prophecy. He talks about schalim, foolish people, and he says some of the Tofsei Torah fall into the same category when he's discussing prophecy. Rambam is very sensitive for the image of Judaism in a world in which he is surrounded by people who are philosophically very sophisticated. I don't think he was embarrassed, but because he believes that the Torah means that, and he says that more than one time. I believe that the Torah is exactly in line with Aristotle. Let's just read this. Da. Now, remember, he did say that we do not accept the idea of Aristotle's eternity of the universe, or even Plato's idea. Now, what did Plato say? Anybody remember? Plato said that God used existing material, the Heli, to make the world. There was an act of creation, but it wasn't creatio ex nihilo. He created out of something. Okay. Now Rambam tells us about Aristotle. He tells us about Plato. Then he says, actually, neither of them are necessary, because I can prove to my intellectual friends that neither of them are philosophically watertight. That's the point. Okay. Now, da. I have not declined to accept the idea of the eternity of the universe, whether it be according to Aristotle or Plato, because of the psukim in the Torah. Because I have many psukim that imply that God is physical. Selem is not a good case, but yad, kol, anything to do with God. Charonaf, vayitatsev, lo sharea perush stumim b'fanenu. But I could handle those, says the Rambam, without any problem. I could interpret the psukim of Bereshit. And I could accommodate eternity of the universe. I could take every pasuk about creation, interpret it in the same way that I've gotten rid of God's physicality. Notice Yoshua, he says this would be even easier for me. I could do exactly the same thing as I did with corporeality. But why didn't I do that? Two reasons that I didn't interpret the Torah to accommodate Aristotle or Plato, but I stuck to the plain text of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim. Ha'achat mehem. One of them is that God doesn't have a body is demonstrated philosophically. In the philosophy of his time, this was clear and accepted. Just, if you like, as the law of gravity or certain philosophical conceptions about time and space. Put yourself back in the 12th century, you can go to the 21st century. Sophisticated, scientific, philosophical people believe in philosophical demonstration. But you have to prove it. And Rambam says eternity of the universe has not been proved. Beginning of line 10. I don't need to force the psukim, I'm not going to interpret the Torah to prove a philosophical position that is not philosophically sound. This is one reason. Can you give me, does anybody remember very briefly, 2 of the 7 proofs the Rambam brought to show that Aristotle and Plato are not philosophically sound? Number 1, anybody remember? I'll give you a clue. David Hume. Induction. What was isn't necessarily what is. So Aristotle goes from a philosophical understanding of the world as it is and says this was always how it was, but that might not be the case. And Hume, the famous 18th century Scottish philosopher, made the same damning critique of induction. What happens today might not happen tomorrow. You cannot swear that it will. Statistically, it will, but you cannot know, absolutely know, that it will because it hasn't happened yet. So Rambam presages Hume, but takes it back into the past. And what was the second attack on Aristotle and Plato? The second attack? No. Epicycles and eccentric orbits. Astronomy disproves Aristotle. And Rambam was right, because Aristotle's model of the universe was a Ptolemaic one, geocentric. Earth is at the center, 9 spheres. They should, by Aristotle's reasoning, be perfectly circular. But the Greeks and the medieval people knew their night sky, and they knew that these orbits are not perfectly circular, they are elliptical. Ever since Kepler, Copernicus, and Galileo, we know that the universe is heliocentric. The sun is at the center, and the planets have orbits, and we are much more sophisticated. So what Rambam does is he says, I will not accept the philosophy of my time because it's not philosophically right. That's what I want to say. Now, what's the second reason? I'm line 11. Ki ha'aminenu she'alo ha'bilti geshem lo yistor lanu divrei misodei ha'Torah v'lo yachziv ma'amar kol navi. If I say that God doesn't have a physical body, Yoshua, I'm not going to contradict anything in the Torah, really. Then I hope you're listening carefully. The ptaim, the fools, think that God has a body, big arm, big leg, big head. Because if I didn't say so, I'd be opposing the Torah. The Rambam has shown us, and I try to give you a little bit of that. You look at the words carefully. Words like tselem always mean something intellectual or spiritual. They do not mean a baking tin. Okay? Aval hu kavanat hakatuv. Mark well, it is kavanat hakatuv that God does not have a body. If you really know. And Rambam was a fantastic interpreter of Tanakh, as we've seen, as we continue to see. אבל אמונת הקדמות על הצד שיראה אותו אריסטו, שהוא הצד החיוב ולא ישתנה טבע כלל, לא יצא דבר חוץ ממנהגו. But if we take Aristotle, nothing changes, ever, nothing. Okay, this is the world that that materialistic scientists, where's this Jeff Fisher here, doctors, learn, nothing changes, law of conservation of matter. There's no God. All these laws that govern the universe were always there. This is what Aristotle says, and this is what the Rambam says is a dangerous idea. Hinei hi soteret hadat ve'ikara u'mechazevet l'chol ot bechreach. It contradicts miracles, religion, u'mevatelet kol ma she'tiyachel bo ha'Torah or tafkid mimenu. Why should God Torah promise reward or threaten punishment if reward and punishment cannot possibly happen? Because nothing changes. It's all geology, biology, zoology, and psychology. We know how the world works. We know how we work. And then we get all sorts of crazy imaginings. Now, in fact, the Rambam refers, the phrase he uses in Arabic is achal al-batin. And achal al-batin, for what Ibn Tibbon translates as Hazaya, was actually an extreme Ismaili sect. Around at the time, they allegorized the entire Torah. So, lahavdil elef haftalot, the Torah was to say, Uchtavtam la'ot al yadecha, the Ismailis would say, Yad means that your physical life, Einecha is a spiritual life, that you should remember God, okay, in your physical life and in your spiritual life. So this will, of course, make the mitzvah of tefillin totally irrelevant. So that's what the Rambam does not want to do. Ve'yetzum b'zeh lemin min hazaya. Omnam, middle of line 15. Im ya'amen ha'kadmut lefi adat hashini asher be'arnu. Now, how about if we leave Aristotle? Who remains? Plato. What did Plato say?
Plato said that there was matter, but God formed it into something.
I hear a voice to my left. There is matter always, because God can't create something out of nothing, because, again, philosophically speaking, nothing comes out of nothing, something comes out of something, but he can certainly improve it. So God took this very basic substratum that existed from time, before time, and made it into the universe. Well, that's not bad. So that the heavens can also come into existence and cease to exist. Presumably there'd be no problem in accepting that. We will be able to accept and justify the miracles because God is working with existing material. That's a very nice idea. Many Orthodox rabbis have said something very similar. Plagues because of Santorini. Okay, there was a tidal wave and there was a tsunami. We love, certain of us, love to explain things that happen in the Torah in a natural way. Using nature, miracles can be produced. They happen at the right time and at the right place. Okay? And we can explain the psukim. We can prove this, in fact. Let me ask you a question, and anybody's entitled to answer now. The first three words of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim, how would you translate that accurately into English? Michael, it has to be you. Phyllis.
In the beginning, God created.
But does the word Bereshit really mean in the beginning? How would I say?
It's construct, it's michut.
Right. If I were to say in the beginning, I would say Barishona. Would I not?
Or Barishon.
Or Barishon, but I'd say Barishona.
When God began to create the heavens and the earth?
Well, so you are saying that at the beginning of God's creation of the heaven and the earth, Bereshit bara Elohim va'aretz hayta tohu va'vohu. There was an earth which was tohu va'vohu. Tohu va'vohu is the Platonic Heli. That's the substratum. It's a confused mixture of stuff, okay? And then out of that tohu va'vohu, God creates. But what happens if I would have been a Kabbalist? What would I have said? How would I have understood Bereshit? A voice to my left says the bet is with, like B'chokhmah, or the Targum says. What does the Targum say? B'chokhmeta, with wisdom God created. Or to cite Chazal, Hakadosh Kudsha Barichu Istakel Ba'oraita Ubarayat Olam. So the bet becomes with. Reshit is something. It's a noun. It is Reshit Dat. Reshit Dat is Torah. Or Heli. Or 22 letters. Sefer Yetzirah. So do you really know what Bereshit bara Elohim means? Could mean all sorts of things. So Rambam would be happy to latch on and say, if you want to be a Platonist and walk around to be accepted in intellectual society, okay, Jeff, you could go around and say, I'm an Orthodox Jew, but I'm a Platonist, because I say Bereshit is with Reshit. So I'm all with you guys. We can go out for a beer happily together. You won't look down on me as some fundamentalist, benighted religious fanatic, which is, I'm pushing the point. But Rambam writes in the introduction, as we've said very clearly, I'm writing this book for people who are disturbed by the clash between the best of the culture of the time, okay, they are the Nevukhim Azman, and traditional Jews. I am showing them, like Wittgenstein said, to show the fly the way out of the fly trap by an exercise of logic and philosophy. I'm showing you, my dear beloved frum Jewish colleague, how to shine in a Aristotelian world and be accepted and not feel that you are a traitor to your faith. That's the great Maimonidean enterprise. So let's read on. Okay. V'imatz'u. Aval, line 18. Aval ein ha'achriach mevi otanu lazeh. But in relation to Plato as well, don't get too excited. We'll only do that to the Torah if we think that Plato is philosophically watertight. Omnam, middle of line 19, Kol 8. If it's not proven philosophically, we won't accept it. Neither Aristotle nor Plato are proven philosophically for similar reasons. So Rambam opts for the third option. Unlike the case of corporeality, where he said, I'm going to interpret 60 terms in the Torah, so that to prove that God does not have a body, I'm not going to do the same thing with the eternity of the universe, which would be a less daunting prospect, because I don't think it is philosophically proven. But let's see how he ends up here, okay? So, Vada, line 21, Ki im ha'amanat chidush ha'olam yu ha'otot kulam efshariyot. V'tiyah Torah efsharit v'tipol kol she'ela she'tish'el bazeh hanyan. Religiously speaking, I do a lot better with creation than with either Aristotle or Plato. Ad she'im yomar, lama sam ha'eloah nuvuato bazeh v'lo nitna lezulato. If I have a God who has lots of wisdom, but some will, I can account for things that happen, religiously speaking, in the world. Why is Moshe a prophet and Jack not? Okay? Don't give up hope, Jack. You still may get to be a prophet. According to the Rambam, you have to know how, okay? But if there's a matter of divine intervention, then I can understand. One nation got the Torah, another didn't. And why now? Why are these mitzvot? Why are those things averot? These miracles and nothing else. We're going to talk about that. Why didn't God make us perfect people to do the right thing? Why did he give us a Yetzer Hara? Could have solved a lot of problems, okay? Now, if we accept that God intervenes a little, and emphasize a little, we can say that God in his wisdom, which of course we cannot understand, has a reason for so doing. But if nothing is allowed to change ever, religiously speaking, we're going to have a lot of problems. כמו שהמציא העולם כשרצה על זאת הצורה, ולא נדע רצונו או אופני החוכמה ביחד צורתו וזמנו, כן לא נדע רצונו או חיוב חוכמתו ביחד כל מה שקדמה השאלה עליו. ואם יאמר אומר שהעולם כן התחייב, once you say that the world is deterministic, that cannot proceed in any other way than by wise laws and rules, okay, then we have a whole host of questions about God, about prophecy, about divine providence. Everything is a question. How does this happen? How can this happen? It makes our religious belief extremely complicated. ולצאת מהם, כי אם במענים מגונים יתקבצו האכזבה והביטול לכל פשוטי התורה, שאין ספק בהם, למשכיל שהם כפי הפשוטים ההם. And we have to torture the psukim completely out of what they might mean in any meaningful way. In other words, there are limits to interpretation as well. ומפני זה היא הבריחה מזה הדעת. And that's why we will not accept eternity of the universe. Neither Aristotle nor Plato. ולזה קלו ימי החשובים, ויכלו בחקירה זאת השאלה, but the thinkers are continuing to think and examine this issue, שאילו התבאר החידוש במופת, and if they turn up with a philosophical proof of creation, ואפילו על דעת אפלטון ייפול כל מה שדיברו בו עלינו הפילוסופים סרה. Then we can gloat and say we've beaten the philosophers at their own game. Rambam says, in relation to the most pressing philosophical issue of his time, it hasn't been resolved yet, and it could go either way. Now, it could go in the way of creation, which will make us, Orthodox rabbinic Jews, very happy, to prove philosophically that there was an act of creation. Okay? וכן אילו התעמת להם מופת על הקדמות, על דעת אריסטו. But what happens if philosophy proves beyond any reasonable philosophical doubt that Aristotle is right? תיפול התורה בכללה, we're going to have a big problem with our Torah. ויעתק העניין לדעות אחרות, and we're going to have to look for many different opinions to justify being philosophical Jews in our time. הנה כבר ביארתי לך כי העניין כולו נתלה בזה המבוקש ודאהו. So, what are we saying here? What we're saying here is that the issue remains an open one. And Rambam, in fact, is giving us, Orthodox Jews, if you like, a strategy. How are we to deal with challenges, serious challenges? And we live in a time of challenges. Come on, we all know when we mix with philosophers and scientists, non-Jews, Jews too, they would look at people of religion and look at them rather sadly and say, you benighted primitive people, wake up, smell the hummus, join the ranks of the real people, the thinkers, the philosophers, the scientists, okay? Why are you hanging out in your backwater, still believing in fairy tales and stories, and God does this and God does the other? Rambam is giving us a blueprint, and this is what's more important than Aristotle or Plato or the plain sense of the Torah. Whenever you have an issue that is challenging, philosophically or scientifically, what you have to do is you have to analyze it and say, number one, is the criticism of Orthodox Judaism philosophically sound and convincing beyond doubt? And number two, what do I sacrifice as a person of faith for accepting that popular philosophical view? But Rambam says you have to have the two things. Now, I'm going to again say a little about the last three lines. Rambam says, look, the jury is still out, to use a common law term. And I've mentioned some of the thinkers to you before, the great Islamic theologians who were arguing about this, okay? There are the Aristotelians, Ibn Sina, versus the much more, if you like, religious or much less philosophical ones. What Rambam is saying is that, just a second, is that you do have a way out. But your way out has to make philosophical sense. You say, one, the philosophy is still questionable. And number two, what do I sacrifice in terms of religion. He would say to Aristotle, have you thrown the baby out with the bathwater? Without a God, you may be in trouble in many other areas. Now remember, this is the 12th century. It's not the last century. It's not hundreds of years of practice at dealing with these challenges. Rambam is a pioneer. We're reading a 12th century book. Now his view is unique, and his view influenced not only Muslim thinkers, but the great Christian scholastic of the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, owes a huge amount to Maimonides because Aquinas basically does the same thing. Christians too, Catholics wanted to be recognized as being intelligent. So they have to be Aristotelian in the 13th century, but they don't want to give up their faith. So Maimonides is the way out. He, if I can use an analogy, is the Wittgenstein of the 12th century. He'll show us how to be able to be both philosophical and theological. But I'm going to say one more thing, Yoshua, before I let you in for a very brief comment, okay? Commentators on Rambam have gone to town on this, and they ask the following interesting question. Rambam says, look, it may be that philosophically speaking, there'll be an absolutely convincing proof of eternity of the universe. What will the Rambam do then? What will he do then? Now, some of them say he won't do anything because he will find as many scientific holes in the argument of the philosophers that he can, and he'll say we're going to lose our faith. Another group, and Ibn Tibbon may have been one of them, and this is why Ibn Tibbon wanted to come to Fostat to speak to the Rambam. He had a list of questions prepared. This was one of them. What would you, Rambam, do if actually somebody came along, a genius philosopher, and proved beyond all reasonable doubt that the doctrine of eternity of the universe, no creation, all wisdom, no will, is the only philosophically compelling path? What would you do? Now, did Ibn Tibbon ever get to meet the Rambam?
No.
No, because
The Rambam had no
wrote
time.
This famous letter.
Letter.
Who said no? Was that you, Jean?
No, it was me.
Ah,
Because the
Michael.
Rambam had no time. He was too busy with treating patients.
Yeah, well, he was also very weak. You remember, he says, I lie on my bed at night, I can barely move, I'm so faint. A pathetic picture, okay? Don't come. Was he really as pathetic as all that, or did he not want to answer Ibn Tibbon's questions? Because remember, the Rambam says at the very beginning, Yoshua, I'm sure you remember this well. Rambam says, I'm going to give you hints. I'm going to contradict myself. And I'll show you a contradiction fairly soon, okay? Rambam contradicts himself, okay?
Why should he do that?
Okay, but he does so deliberately. He says, I'm going to take you to a point where you will have to understand by yourself what the answer is going to be. And this is the brush off that Ibn Tibbon gets. Work it out. I'm not going to give you the answer because, well, there are all sorts of reasons for that. But he says so. Beginning of his book, he says, this is my methodology. I'm not going to give you the answers to the most difficult questions, okay? You have to work them out yourself, but I will, as I told Yael Bart at the very beginning, you have to connect the dots. So,
Dr. Sinclair, this is the reason why there was so much opposition to the Rambam, because this is against the whole Jewish tradition. The Rambam makes philosophy the arbiter of the truth of the Torah. And this is impossible to accept. And everybody attacked him on that. The Torah, for Jews, was always the center, and the philosophy was judged by the Torah, not the Torah by the philosophy.
And I'm going, of course, to qualify what you said. There were those who felt exactly what you said, but there were defenders of the Rambam as well in Provence, as you know, and right through the generations. Rambamists have been extremely influential. They haven't been quite as frank as the
Moreh Nevukhim was never
Rambam.
learned in the big communities. It was always the professors who learned it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We must be a group of professors.
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
But since I was asked to teach Moreh Nevukhim, that's
okay.
exactly what I am doing. But it certainly did appeal to a group of people. And I should just say that even Ramban, Nachmanides, in certain places praises Maimonides.
And
In other
certain
places,
attacks him
in other
very
places,
viciously.
Yeah.
in other places, he says, no, terrible thing, okay? The Rambam is, you should forget everything he says. But the question of how much philosophy often is a question of whether you admit it or not. And we can correspond. I'm not going to push the point now, but it's a very well taken point. And I think we all know by now how you think. So we will wait for the next interpellation. But I should just point out to you, I don't know whether you've read Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner's Pachad Yitzchak. I assume you've...
Small parts.
Right. Well, if you read it, if you read large chunks of it, it's full of philosophy and psychology. But he doesn't say so. And he would never say what the Rambam said, okay? But in fact, everybody uses this idea that some philosophy is legitimate. The question is, what? And that's what we're going to argue about. Let me read a couple more extracts. Hinei kvar nitba'eh lecha ha'inyan v'nigle hadat. And I want you to pay careful attention, Yoshua, because this is Rambam speaking, not me, okay? V'hu sha'anachnu ne'ot la'aristo b'chatzi midarto. What does that mean? Ne'ot is to accept. We will accept half of Aristotle's opinion. V'na'amin shezeh ha'metziut la'olam nitzchi. And we will accept that the world will last forever. Al zeh teva, and this nature will last forever. Remember the Rambam, citing the Moreh Shmuel, En ben yemot HaMashiach v'imei olam hazeh ela, what's the hemshech? Shi'abud malchuyot bilvad. In other words, Rambam paskins this halacha in Hilchot Malachim. The only difference between them, what we experience today in terms of wisdom and laws of nature and the period of the Mashiach, is a sovereign Jewish state. That's all. Now, we will be we expect a period where the Jews will be accepted as being the arbiters of true faith, which would be nice. But we have our work cut out to convince the non-Jews of that. But this is what the Rambam says. This is bringing Aristotle and saying Aristotle, in fact, is the Gemara. He just said it in a different time, in a different language. But this is what the Torah itself means. Who says that the world will come to an end and then suddenly be a whole new universe, which is not natural? People will be pulling their lamingtons off trees. They'll be eating steaks without having to have a grill. I mean, all of this is fantasy, says the Rambam. Al zeh teva asher ritzehu yit'aleh v'lo yishtaneh mimenu davar. V'shum panim ela bifratav al tzad hamofet. There'll be the gar ze'ev im keves, which means that the Jewish people will achieve a status in the Messianic period that they never have achieved before, and will become the top nation in terms of Hashem Echad Ushmo Echad. We will teach the rest of the world, but there'll be disease and there'll be death. If we have time, we'll talk about Rambam and Tchiyat HaMeitim. A problem, okay? For an Aristotelian, to have a physical reincarnation is a problem. But of course, God could change anything. Or kulo, or lahadiro, or lahadir as a teva, shirtse mi teva'av. Okay? So, let's just read 3, and which is the last extract from the Moreh Nevukhim. Kvar hoda'aticha. Dat Toratenu bazeh ha'inyan. Now listen, Rambam says, I've already made known to you Dat Torah, Das Torah, bazeh ha'inyan, שראוי להאמינו שאין הרחקה באמרנו שכל אלו הפעולות מציאותם והיעדרם נמשך אחר חוכמתו יתברך. Everything that happens in the universe, coming into being and disappearing, is all according to the wisdom of God, its fixed laws, that we understand as far as we can, and we still do not know a fraction of what nature does, even our human bodies. Jeff, how much do we really know? Why do humans sweat the way they do? Why do we have this sebum under the epidermis? I mean, thousands of things. Why so many trillions of microbes? And what about the dead bits of the genome, the junk? Is it really junk? We know so much, and yet we know so little. This is what runs the universe. God's laws, his wisdom, and occasionally he will intervene, very occasionally. In other words, the balance is wisdom, the minority is will. The other philosophers, the religious theologians, and Yehuda Levi, who Rambam attacks on more than one occasion, they believe that God is there all the time, intervening, deciding. Reb Nachman, every single blade of grass represents an act of will by God. This is not Rambam, okay? No matter which century we happen to be living in. And nischol is from sachal. We will miss out a lot. How much do we really know? What is our appendix for, Jeff? Why do we have it? Do we know? So many things we just don't know. And yet, there is so much we do know that attests to the wisdom in nature, which is, of course, God manifesting himself, that we dare not say it's pointless. We say we just don't know. You start Torah Moshe Rabbeinu Kula. And this is the whole point of the Torah. How does the Torah begin? Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'nei tov ma'od. What's that tov? That's mathematics, astronomy, biology, zoology, metaphysics, understanding this world, and only getting a little bit of it, and then the next generation down. Our science of today will be confined to the dustbins of history. New science will emerge, like dwarfs building on the shoulders of giants. But we will know more. Tov ma'od. Or boy shlima hatzur tamim paolo. Rambam is a great Bible commentator. Tzur tamim paolo. God is perfect. Everything he does is amazing. V'da'ehu. And when Rambam says v'da'ehu, he means think about it carefully. I want you to understand this, not to dismiss it. Now, when you understand this and philosophy, as I've explained in all of the previous chapters, line 1 on page 2, Bezer Mamar, Lo timsa benehem machloket klal. Yoshua, Rambam says you won't find any difference between philosophy and the Torah. V'lo timsa machloket ela. Except in that area of they believe in eternity of the universe and of matter, we believe in acts of creation, but the majority of what we as religious Jews need to aspire to is knowledge of God through understanding his world. Now, I talked about the contradiction. There are always contradictions in the Rambam. According to what we've just learned, you would have said that human beings are created by God in an act of creation. That's part of the Chidush, right? That's the story. Reshit bara, Adam, Chava, or Adam vayikra shemam Adam. But in the Moreh Nevukhim itself, Rambam seems to imply that human beings are an act of synthesis between the influence of the spheres and the so-called active intellect. So we have a contradiction here. How are we going to resolve it, if at all? You have to tune in about 4 weeks' time. But until
What is
then,
the active intellect?
well, I'm going to tell you to go into your Google, Yeshua, and read it up, because it's part of Aristotle. Now, you might connect it to the Shekhinah, okay? And we will talk about that. But what I'm trying to say here is that the balance between wisdom and will changes. It's a dynamic thing, very dynamic. And when we talk about Nevuah, which is our next major topic, we're going to see that Rambam's view of Nevuah is that prophecy is a natural thing.
You'll visit next Wednesday. It's engagement.
That prophecy is a natural thing, and that anybody could be a prophet if they prepare themselves properly. There is, however, a small amount of divine intervention. What the balance is, we have to see. But what Rambam is doing is telling us that don't worry if you feel somewhat conflicted between your understanding of the best of the secular knowledge of your time and your religious, Orthodox Jewish training, beliefs, and texts. You can accommodate. You can
Where does
accommodate.
Rambam know from that knowledge of God is the main goal of a Jew? In the Torah, it says only la'ava li'irauto and to be mekayem the mitzvot. It
But we
never
read
said
that Yeshua last time. He says, how do you get to Ava and Yirah? He says, Leida ulahamin, Leida. There's no
knowledge of
emunah
God is-
without Yidi'ah. That's the Rambam. I'm not giving you anything else.
So the eye is only a means for Ava. That's what the Rambam means?
That is what you can put it like that. If it makes you happy, Gesundheit. Put it like that. Ava and Yirah, you cannot have Ava and Yirah of somebody you don't know. Okay? And Kavachomer Hashem Yitbarach. So, but he says the first mitzvah is Leida or Lahamin, and Leida, as you know, comes before Lahamin. You cannot believe unless you know. And you shouldn't. You shouldn't be so simple-minded. As again, we are immersing ourselves in the Rambam's personality, in his world. We will hopefully read quite a bit more, but that's him. Take him or leave him. You do not need to take the Rambam in his Moreh Nevukhim. Okay? Although, of course, the Moreh Nevukhim, of course, his Mishneh Torah includes a lot of his Moreh Nevukhim, as you know. Now, I'll just tell you what's going to happen next week, because the rest of these sources are actually about how we can reconcile our pshat, our plain text, Bereshit bara Elohim, and the age of the universe, Tafshin, Pei Gimel, almost Tafshin, Pei Daled Haba Aleinu Letova, with geology, paleontology, science, genetics. How can we do that? Using the Rambam. And here I'm going to make things a little bit lighter. So next week it'll be more fun. We're going to read Ramban, Malbim, Tiferet Israel, take a little detour to Munkach, believe it or not, read a bit from the Minchas Elazar, and then we'll go into Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Amazing stuff. Yes, the universe is 15 billion years old, and you know what? It's fine if you're a Kabbalist. And finally, Rav Kook and Harav Professor Moshe David Kasuto, okay, about how we as Jews approach creation stories. So it'll be a little bit of light relief, I think, next week. And then we'll continue, we'll plunge back into the Moreh because the same three options, I'm going to stop a share, the same three options, namely, either everything existed and never changed, or there was unchanging existence, Plato, with some kind of change, or everything is God. Those three theories apply to Nevuah as well. And the Rambam begins the next section in the Moreh Nevukhim, okay, with exactly this. He says, you know what? There are three views regarding eternity of the universe. There are three views regarding prophecy. Here they are, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do with them, and then you will decide, A, what you think I think, and B, what you think you would like to think. So in that sense, I think that we've done justice to the most technical part. Now, 37 chapters I have compressed into 2 sessions. I hope that you will forgive me. Jean, will you? You have to unmute.
Indeed.
I have compressed the most technical part of the Moreh Nevukhim into 2 sessions. I hope I've done it justice, but I apologize if I haven't.
I wanted to ask you, the conclusion of chapter 25 from Rambam is a little bit weak because he had 2 solutions, the solution of the Torah or the solution of Platon, and the way he concluded is relatively weak.
Well, you are tempting me, aren't you?
Ouais.
Les temptations.
Oui.
Les temptations de dire que, okay. I have a voice from my left saying in English
Yes.
that the Rambam may have been disguising his true belief.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to say any more, but I hope that you understand
Yes.
what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Okay, so I cannot say any more because Rambam would say, quiet.
This was he asked that silence of the readers.
The silence of the reader. So it could mean, as you must know, that Ibn Tibbon and other commentators take the Rambam into a different way. What I've given you is the, if you like, the Orthodox reading. Okay, so there you go.
What, there's an Orthodox reading of Rambam and there's an unorthodox reading?
Absolutely. There is a
Really?
skeptical reading, an unorthodox reading, a philosophical reading, and an orthodox reading. I am totally orthodox. And if I've managed to upset you with my orthodox reading, just imagine how you would be jumping up in your chair if I was to give you. There have been Maimonidean, have you ever heard of Yosef ibn Kaspi?
Yes.
Yes. Well, you're sure you know that Ibn Kaspi was a great Chassid of Rambam. He says the things that would hardly be tolerated, and that's why we never studied Ibn Kaspi in yeshiva, okay? But there were unorthodox Maimonideans, okay? So there are different readings, and all this just goes to show how Rambam was just influenced and gave rise to so many different ways of thinking about Judaism. So an amazing mind, okay? And more than the actual issues of his Aristotle, Plato, or something in between, is the opportunity he gave to people who were thinking very different thoughts and wanted to be in different camps and thought that the truth lay in different areas, could somehow bring it all together after all. So that may be the greatness of the Rambam, and that may be the point about chapitre 25, okay, in le deuxième livre. That is the point, much more than whether there's a balance or not, but it does give us a springboard for future thought. Okay, are there any more questions?
Yes. May I ask something? I have a little
Sure.
problem. To my mind, if you know something, if you really know it, you don't have to believe it. I understood also that in Mashiach, when Mashiach comes, the revelation will be so great that everybody will know God, and there won't be any need for faith. Won't have to believe because everybody will know.
Okay, excellent point. A Rambam would say that if you really know, then you would never think of doing anything which contradicts that knowledge. And the idea is to bring you to know, not to believe. Knowledge comes first. Once you know, you will believe, you will love, you will fear, you will be in awe, you will do. But you have to have very deep knowledge. And unless you have deep knowledge, you'll easily be sidetracked or contradicted. So again, it brings us back to the idea as Rambam begins, the mitzvah rishonah is leida, to know. And he gives us a challenge, and people who do not want to invest a lot of time in learning are clearly not going to be that comfortable. And Rambam would say, sorry, mate, your loss, kind of thing. He's not very forgiving, okay? But as I said, he is the best known Jewish rabbi in the world. Because if you ask somebody in China about a Jewish rabbi, then they may have heard of Maimonides, okay? So certainly that is the Maimonidean path, and we'll see how this becomes stronger and stronger. In the time we have, I see that we're going to take our time here, and how much of the book we do, I will take, as I said, I hope to cover prophecy, the question of evil, divine providence, revelation. We're going to do prophecy. What actually happened on Mount Sinai, Jack? Do you think that every single Jew understood or heard the voice of God?
Well,
That's not what Rambam would say. Are you happy with that?
What they said, the maid saw more revelation than Shekel ben Buzi.
Exactly, there is a midrash, but as Rambam would say, ra'ah and not yada.
Okay.
You can see things and not understand them. Rambam would say the understanding was only possibly for Moshe Rabbeinu, and he interprets all the words in that chapter to fit with his theory. It's an amazing thing, okay? So we will have a look at that too. But everything becomes Rambam's way of interpreting the Torah and the text. It's a complete independent method of parshanut, okay? So, as I said, we'll see how much we can do, but I'm giving you only a few chapters here and there because I can see that if we were to try and read more, we would not get very far at all. But I hope there'll be enough to understand.
Still wonder why the Rambam spends so much time with the minutest details of halacha, and the Mishnah Torah is 10 times as big as Moreh Nevukhim, and if the importance for him was to know God.
I'll give you, I think, a very brief answer, okay? If you look at the Mishneh Torah, you'll find that it is actually quite full of Rambam's philosophy, okay? At the end of every... If you look at chapter 7 of Hilchot Yesodei Torah, talks about prophecy. Look at chapter Gimel in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, talks about the Galgalim, the spheres. Hilchot Shuvah is very theological. He says in Hilchot Shuvah, why the things you do can affect or will not affect why Paro couldn't do Shuvah. The end of almost every single section in Mishneh Torah has a little drasha that touches on philosophical things. He also, in his commentary on Masechet Sanhedrin, gives you 13 Yesodot HaEmunah. There were no Yesodot HaEmunah really before the Rambam. Why does he do that? The answer is, I think, as follows. Now, you'll bear with me on this. Rambam says that God gave us all very intelligent and much less intelligent a shortcut to knowing him, and that is Torah, mitzvot, because he always says behind every mitzvah there is an idea. You have to understand the idea or do your best. So he's giving you the tools. How do you begin? And you know what he also says? When you daven 3 times a day and you shut your mind off from everything else, if you can do that, you're training your mind and you're preparing it for abstract thought. And eventually you will have control. And then you can think in an abstract way. And then you can become a wise person. So everything comes together all the time.
But nevertheless, you remain outside the castle.
But nevertheless, you remain outside the palace unless you're Moshe Rabbeinu. Would you like to read the section about the palace? Jean.
I read it already.
Okay, so we don't need to read it. If I want to, I might bring it in, but it'll come.
Maybe this is also the part of the secret.
It is definitely part of the secret. And I think that I'm going to bid everybody a very good evening, unless somebody really wants to take up the space. And hopefully.
Yes, I do. Got a real quick question.
Who's that?
Related to Harvey.
Yeah, okay.
So you touched on something right at the beginning, kind of holding at the end. Really interesting. You talk about Aristotle and the Greek gods and such. How did Aristotle, who lived in this pantheon of Greek gods, have this idea of a concept of a one God? Where did he get that from?
I don't know whether Aristotle had an idea of God at all.
But he talks about God.
He has an idea of an unmoved mover. He has a philosophy. I'm not sure that he actually believed in any God, but he would have pretended to. Just like his teacher Socrates. Do you remember what Socrates said to his students in his last speech in the Phaedo? After I'm dead, he says, I promised a cockerel to Asclepius. Jeff, who is Asclepius? You should know. Unmute.
I remember.
Unmute.
I don't remember.
He's the god of medicine, Asclepius. And he had 3 daughters. They were called Hygiena, hygiene, Sanitea, sanitary, and Panacea, which is the panacea, the cure-all. Okay? So Socrates says, he was a philosopher. He got in trouble. But he still wants to pay his vow to offer in the temple of Asclepius the cockerel. So he planted ideas. Aristotle was his student. For 20 years, he learned hard in Aristotle's Beis HaMedrash for 20 years, okay? And what he plants in Aristotle's head is the idea that, okay, pretend or pay lip service to gods. This was the Greek religion, but inside, be very critical. And Harvey, that's exactly what Aristotle does. He cannot possibly, in his society, say there's no such thing as a god. So I'm speculating. Okay?
Maybe he learned with Jews. Maybe he secretly was meeting with Jews.
There is, of course, it is historically absolutely unlikely that he knew what a Jew was. Okay? He lived in the north of Greece, but Jews have claimed Aristotle. And here I'm bringing Yoshua into the conversation. I will bring you some sources next week, perhaps, or I'll send it around. And Aristotle was influenced by the Torah, and he got his influence from Adam Arishon, who was the father of humankind, who was close to God, and that's how he got what he did. But this is all a matter of speculation, but it's an interesting point to speculate about. Historically speaking, though, Aristotle had no contact with Jews, okay? But those Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, their attitude is a very, very mixed one, okay? And you can feel that they cannot say we deny the whole pantheon of gods. At the same time, their philosophical writings leave a very, very, very thin God, if at all. It's no wonder that in the 19th century, the deists, okay, in the English-speaking world, base themselves upon the philosophy of Aristotle, because it suits you well to be a very unemotional Englishman, not have a very warm God, be able to stand back and say, well, God's there, the Unmoved Mover, we go to church, and we are very dignified for a half hour on a Sunday morning, and we've done our duty, okay? Aristotle. But Aristotle actually, I think, did struggle with all of this. But it was because of him that religion became, Rav Kook, who wrote an essay. In fact, he wrote an essay on what he called Tihur Hadat, the purification of religion. That was what Maimonides was all about, and Maimonides uses Aristotle to purify Judaism, to take away a lot of superstition, a lot of things that might seem to make it silly or unrealistic. And out of that fusion of Aristotle and Torah and Midrash comes this great Maimonidean enterprise that Rambam put into writing at the end of his life, also for a very good reason. The last book he wrote in 1190, it was finished, and in 1204, he was dead. His last great effort, and that is his philosophical legacy. How to combine the two. Okay? So next week we'll have fun with geology, with dinosaurs, with rainbows, and with Aryeh Kaplan and his amazing 15 billion years for the universe. According to the Kabbalah, tune in next Wednesday, 9:15. Bye for now.